The floorboards creaked beneath Evelyn's worn boots as she scrubbed the kitchen floor for the third time that day. Her knees ached against the hard wood, but she dared not slow her pace. Aunt Prudence sat in her rocking chair by the window, sharp eyes watching every movement, waiting for any excuse to unleash another torrent of criticism. "Missed a spot," the older woman snapped, pointing with her cane. "Lazy girl. Your mother would be ashamed to see what you've become." Evelyn bit her tongue, as she had learned to do over the past 6 years. At 18, she had spent a third of her life in this suffocating house in Philadelphia, enduring her aunt's cruelty since her parents died of scarlet fever when she was 12. The promise of shelter had come with a price: endless labor, constant beratement, and the knowledge that she was nothing more than an unwanted burden. The autumn wind rattled the windows, carrying with it the scent of coal smoke and horse manure from the busy street outside. Evelyn paused in her scrubbing to glance through the glass at the world beyond. Women in fine dresses strolling with their husbands, children playing with hoops, vendors calling their wares. A life she could only observe, never participate in. "Stop your daydreaming." Aunt Prudence's cane struck the floor. "The parlor needs dusting, and then you'll help Martha with the washing. Lord knows that Irish girl can't manage on her own." As Evelyn gathered her cleaning supplies, she passed the hall table where the day's mail lay scattered. A newspaper, half unfolded, caught her eye. She knew she shouldn't linger, but something about the small advertisement in the corner drew her attention. "Respectable rancher. Age 32, seeks correspondence with marriageable woman willing to make home in Colorado territory. No cooking skills required. Only a heart that wishes to be loved. Those interested should write to Mr. Thomas Barrett, Pine Ridge, Colorado." The words seemed to leap from the page. A heart that wishes to be loved. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she quickly memorized the address before hurrying to the parlor. All through her dusting, the advertisement haunted her thoughts. A man who didn't demand cooking skills. How different from Aunt Prudence, who criticized every meal Evelyn prepared. A man who spoke of love rather than duty. That night, lying on her narrow cot in the attic, Evelyn stared at the water stains on the ceiling and wrestled with the possibility. Mail-order brides were not uncommon. She had heard whispers of girls from the tenements who had gone west to marry miners and farmers. Some found happiness, others, well, the stories varied. But what future awaited her here? When Aunt Prudence died, her son Harold would inherit the house, and he had made it clear that Evelyn would not be welcome to stay for 3 days. She carried the weight of decision. She observed her life with new eyes, the endless chores, the loveless existence, the way her youth was withering away in this house that smelled of lye soap and disappointment. On the 4th day, when Aunt Prudence retired early with one of her headaches, Evelyn crept down to the study and borrowed paper and pen. By candlelight, she wrote, "Dear Mr. Barrett, I read your advertisement with great interest. I am 18 years of age, of good character, and accustomed to hard work. I must be honest, I am an orphan, currently residing with relations who have provided shelter but little else. I have few possessions and no dowry to speak of. However, I am healthy, able-bodied, and eager for a life where kindness might exist alongside duty. If you seek someone young and strong, willing to face whatever challenges the frontier might bring, I hope you will consider my correspondence. Most sincerely, Miss Evelyn Shaw." She posted the letter before her courage could fail, using coins saved from selling eggs to Martha's sister. Then came the waiting 2 weeks of jumping whenever the post arrived, of hiding her anticipation behind the same mask of resignation she had worn for years. When the response came, Evelyn's hands shook as she hid it beneath her apron, waiting until she could read it in private. Thomas Barrett's handwriting was steady but unpracticed. "Miss Shaw, your honesty is refreshing. I will be equally plain. Life here is not easy, the land is hard, the winter's harsh, and town is a day's ride away. But the sunsets paint the mountains gold, and a man can build something of his own here. I offer a proper marriage, a home that needs a woman's touch, and respect for whoever is brave enough to take this chance. If you are willing, I will send funds for your passage. Yours respectfully. Thomas Barrett Evelyn read the letter until she had memorized every word. That night, she packed her few belongings: 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, a photograph of her parents, and the small sewing kit she had hidden from Aunt Prudence. When morning came, she left a note stating simply that she had found employment elsewhere and walked out of that house forever. The train journey west was a revelation. Evelyn had never traveled beyond Philadelphia's borders, and each mile revealed a changing world. The orderly farms of Pennsylvania gave way to the rolling hills of Ohio, then the vast plains of Kansas. She watched through grimy windows as civilization thinned and the landscape opened into something wild and limitless. Fellow passengers included rough men heading to mining camps, families seeking homesteads, and 3 other young women whose careful distance from male passengers suggested they, too, were mail-order brides. As the train climbed into Colorado territory, the autumn air grew thin and sharp. Mountains rose like giants from the earth, their peaks already white with early snow. The settlements became smaller, rougher, clusters of wooden buildings that looked as if they might blow away in a strong wind. Evelyn's stomach churned with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. There was no turning back now. Pine Ridge appeared as a collection of sun-weathered structures huddled against the immensity of the landscape. The train station was merely a platform and a shed. As Evelyn descended with her carpet bag, dust swirled around her skirts, and she tasted grit in the air. Men in worn clothing stared openly at her and the other female passengers. She kept her eyes forward, searching for a man who might be Thomas Barrett. She saw him before he saw her, a tall figure standing beside a weathered wagon, hat in hand. He was younger than she had imagined, with sun-darkened skin and broad shoulders that spoke of physical labor. When their eyes met, she saw uncertainty there that matched her own. "Miss Shaw." His voice was deeper than expected, roughened by wind and weather. "Mr. Barrett." She managed a small curtsy, feeling absurdly formal in this wild place. He stepped forward, seeming unsure whether to offer his hand or take her bag. He chose the bag, lifting it easily. "The journey must have been tiring. I've got a room at the boarding house if you'd like to rest before—" He paused, color rising in his weathered cheeks. "That is, the preacher's expecting us this afternoon, but if you've changed your mind—" "I haven't changed my mind," Evelyn said quietly, surprising herself with her steadiness. Relief flickered across his features. As he helped her into the wagon, his hands were gentle but careful not to linger. Evelyn arranged her skirts and took her first real look at Pine Ridge, a single main street with a general store, saloon, boarding house, and small church. Beyond lay endless space beneath a sky so vast it made her dizzy. "It's not much," Thomas said, following her gaze. "Nothing like Philadelphia, I expect?" "No," Evelyn agreed, then added, "It's bigger." He glanced at her, surprise giving way to what might have been the beginning of a smile. "That it is, Miss Shaw. That it is." As the wagon rolled toward the church, Evelyn gripped the seat to steady herself against the rutted road. In 2 hours, she would be Mrs. Thomas Barrett, wife to a stranger in a strange land. The autumn sun beat down mercilessly, and dust coated her traveling dress. Everything she had known was behind her now. Ahead lay only uncertainty, the vast Colorado sky, and a man who had promised not just shelter and a ring, but love. The wagon lurched over the final rise, and Thomas's ranch spread before them, a modest wooden house with a sagging porch, a barn that leaned slightly eastward, and endless acres of yellowed grass stretching toward the mountains. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the property, making it appear both lonely and somehow expectant. "Welcome home," Thomas said quietly, his voice carrying an uncertain note. Evelyn clutched her carpetbag tighter. The wedding ceremony had been brief, witnessed by the preacher's wife and a man who smelled of whiskey. The gold band on her finger, simple and worn, clearly not new, felt foreign and heavy. She was no longer Evelyn Shaw, but Mrs. Thomas Barrett, and this isolated place was now her world. Thomas helped her down from the wagon, his hands immediately dropping away once her feet touched the ground. "I'll show you inside," he said, grabbing her bag. I tried to clean up some." The house smelled of wood smoke and loneliness. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large iron stove, a rough-hewn table, and 2 chairs that didn't match. Everything was functional but bare. No curtains on the windows, no rug on the floor, no pictures on the walls. It was a space where someone existed rather than lived. "Your room is through here," Thomas said, leading her to a door off the main room. Evelyn stopped in the doorway, confused. The small room contained a narrow bed with fresh linens, a washstand, and hooks on the wall for clothing. "My room?" Color crept up Thomas's neck. "I thought, that is, I wanted you to have space to settle in, get comfortable. I'll be in the barn loft if you need anything." The barn? Evelyn turned to face him fully for the first time since the ceremony. In the fading light through the window, she could see the weariness in his eyes, the way he held himself carefully distant. "But we're married. On paper, yes." He set down her bag and stepped back toward the door. "But I'm not. I won't assume anything. Mrs. Barrett, you came here out of necessity, not choice. I'll not add to your burdens by demanding what a wife might owe a husband. Take your time. When you're ready, if you're ever ready to be married in truth, you let me know." Before she could respond, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Evelyn stood alone in the strange house, her married name still foreign on her tongue, wondering at this man who had brought her 3,000 miles to be his wife, only to sleep in his barn. The first week passed in careful choreography. Thomas rose before dawn, leaving coffee warming on the stove and fresh eggs on the table. He worked the ranch until sunset, appearing only for meals that Evelyn prepared with increasing confidence on the temperamental stove. Their conversations were stilted, formal, discussions of supplies needed from town, the threat of early winter, the cow that would calve come spring. Evelyn threw herself into making the house a home. She scrubbed years of bachelor neglect from the floors, sewed curtains from fabric Thomas brought from town without her asking, and coaxed a small herb garden into existence near the kitchen door despite the approaching cold. Each small improvement seemed to startle Thomas, as if beauty were something he'd forgotten could exist in his world. On her 8th day, she found him standing in the doorway, staring at the bright yellow curtains she'd hung. "They're just feed sack fabric," she said quickly. "I hope you don't mind." "They look like sunshine," he interrupted, his voice rough. "My mother had yellow curtains in our house back in Ohio. I'd forgotten." It was the first piece of his past he'd offered. Evelyn waited, but he retreated again into silence, disappearing to tend the horses. That night, she left his supper warming on the stove and took her own plate outside, sitting on the porch steps to watch the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. The isolation that had frightened her at first now seemed almost peaceful. She didn't hear Thomas approach until he spoke. "Mind if I sit?" Evelyn shifted to make room on the step. They sat in companionable silence, watching the stars emerge in the vast sky. "I had a brother," Thomas said suddenly. "Jacob. He was the one who wanted to come west, start fresh after our parents died. I followed because, well, what else was I going to do? We built this place together, worked it side by side for 3 years. What happened to him?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "Fever took him 2 winters ago. Doctor was a day's ride away, wouldn't have mattered anyway," he said. "After that, the silence got too loud. That's why I wrote that advertisement, not for cooking or cleaning. I can manage that myself. I just wanted—" He stopped, shaking his head. "Someone to make yellow curtains." Evelyn finished softly. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw the depths of loneliness that matched her own. Something like that. October surrendered to November, bringing winds that shook the house and mornings when frost silvered the grass. Evelyn learned the rhythms of ranch life, feeding chickens, collecting eggs, helping Thomas repair fences before the deep snow came. Her hands, once soft from indoor work, grew calloused but capable. The careful distance between them began to shrink by degrees. Thomas started taking his meals inside rather than on the porch. He lingered after supper, teaching Evelyn to play checkers by lamplight. She discovered he could read but struggled with it, so she began reading aloud from her mother's Bible and the few books he owned. His favorite was an old almanac that she made sound like grand adventure. Then came the night when winter arrived in earnest. Evelyn woke to the sound of wind screaming around the house and something banging repeatedly against the walls. She wrapped a shawl around her nightdress and ventured into the main room to find Thomas already there, fully dressed and pulling on his coat. "Barn doors come loose," he shouted over the wind. "Got to secure it before the horses panic. Let me help." "No, stay inside where it's warm." But warmth was already fleeing the house as the wind found every crack and gap. Evelyn built up the fire and put water on to heat, knowing Thomas would be frozen when he returned. An hour passed, then 2. The banging stopped, but Thomas didn't return. Fear crept into Evelyn's chest. She paced the small room, peering through the windows but seeing only swirling darkness. Finally, she couldn't wait any longer. She pulled on her heaviest dress, coat, and boots, lit a lantern, and ventured into the storm. The wind nearly knocked her down immediately, and the cold stole her breath. She struggled toward the barn, calling Thomas's name, her voice lost in the howling gale. She found him unconscious in the snow, a gash on his forehead where the barn door had struck him. Blood had frozen in dark ribbons down his face. Evelyn dropped to her knees beside him, shaking him desperately. His skin was ice cold, but she felt the faint rise and fall of his chest, drawing on strength she didn't know she possessed. Evelyn managed to drag Thomas back to the house. She had seen Aunt Prudence tend injuries, one of the few useful things from her years of servitude. She cleaned the wound, bandaged his head, and then faced the greater challenge of his dangerous cold. She built the fire high, heated stones to wrap in cloth and place around him, and layered every blanket in the house over his still form. Through the long night, she sat beside him, spooning warm broth between his lips when he stirred, replacing the cooling stones, maintaining her vigil. He mumbled in his delirium, calling for Jacob, for his mother, and, surprisingly, repeatedly, for her. "Don't leave," he muttered, his hand finding hers. "Evelyn, please, don't leave." "I'm here," she whispered, squeezing his fingers. "I'm not going anywhere." Dawn came gray and bitter, but Thomas's fever had broken. His eyes opened, focusing with difficulty on her face. "You came for me," he said wonderingly. "Of course I did." Exhaustion made her honest. "You're my husband." His hand tightened on hers. "I'm sorry," he said, "for keeping distance, for making you feel. I thought I was protecting you, giving you choices, but I was just scared." "Scared of what?" "Of wanting you to stay for more than loneliness. Of caring too much when you might leave come spring, when the pass is clear and you could go back east if you wanted." Evelyn smoothed the hair back from his bandaged forehead, her touch lingering. "Thomas Barrett, you promised me more than shelter and a ring. You promised me love. Did you mean it?" "Every word," he said hoarsely. She leaned down and kissed him then, gently, mindful of his injuries but needing him to understand. When she pulled back, his eyes held wonder. "The barn," he said suddenly, trying to sit up. "Can wait," Evelyn said firmly, pressing him back down. "Right now, you need rest and warmth, and you need to move back into this house proper. I won't have my husband sleeping in the barn anymore. The neighbors will talk." "What neighbors?" A weak smile crossed his face. "Nearest ranch is 20 miles. "Then the horses will talk," she said, matching his smile. "Scandalous behavior, Mr. Barrett." As the storm continued to rage outside, inside the small house, something new took root, fragile as the herb garden under snow, but just as determined to survive. Thomas slept, his hand still holding hers, while Evelyn kept watch. She thought of the girl she'd been just months ago, scrubbing floors in Philadelphia, dreaming of a life beyond her aunt's cruelty. That girl could never have imagined this, a house on the frontier, a wounded husband who needed her, a love growing slowly but surely in the midst of hardship. When Thomas woke again, she would tell him about her past, about the years of feeling unwanted and unloved, and he would tell her more about Jacob, about the loneliness that had nearly broken him. They would build their marriage on truth, not just necessity, and spring would find them not as strangers bound by paper, but as husband and wife in every sense. But for now, Evelyn simply held his hand and watched the snow fall, feeling for the first time in her life that she was exactly where she belonged. Spring arrived like a miracle across the Colorado plains, melting the snow to reveal green grass that seemed to appear overnight. The air carried the scent of wildflowers and possibility. Thomas had recovered fully from his injury, though a thin scar crossed his forehead, a reminder of the night everything changed between them. "Come on," Thomas called from the barn one bright morning in April. "Got something to show you." Evelyn emerged from the house, wiping flour from her hands. She'd been making bread, a skill she'd finally mastered on the temperamental stove. Thomas stood beside two horses, both saddled and ready. "I don't know how to ride," she said, eyeing the animals warily. "Time you learn, then." His smile was warm, transforming his usually serious face. "Can't be a rancher's wife and not know how to sit a horse. This here's Buttercup. She's gentle as they come." The mare was indeed placid, standing perfectly still as Thomas helped Evelyn mount. She clutched the saddle horn, feeling impossibly high off the ground. But Thomas's steady hands guided her feet to the stirrups and showed her how to hold the reins. "Where are we going?" she asked as he swung up onto his own horse with practiced ease. "Thought we'd check the north pasture, see how the grass is coming in, maybe have our noon meal by the creek." They rode slowly, Thomas keeping close watch as Evelyn learned to move with the horse's rhythm. The vastness of the land still took her breath away, rolling hills covered in fresh grass, mountains rising sharp against the crystal sky, and not another soul visible in any direction. But it no longer frightened her. Somewhere during the long winter, this wild place had become home. "You're doing fine," Thomas said, pride evident in his voice. "Natural-born horsewoman." Evelyn laughed, the sound carrying across the prairie. "Aunt Prudence would faint dead away to see me now, riding astride like a man. No proper lady's side saddle." "Nothing improper about being practical out here," Thomas said. "Besides, you gave up being a Philadelphia lady when you married me." "Best trade I ever made," she said softly, and watched color rise in his cheeks. They reached a grove of cottonwoods along a creek swollen with snowmelt. Thomas spread a blanket in the dappled shade and unpacked the simple meal Evelyn had prepared: cold beef, bread, early wild onions she'd found near the house. They ate in comfortable silence, listening to the water bubble over stones and birds calling from the trees. "Evelyn," Thomas said suddenly, setting aside his food, "there's something I've been wanting. That is, I've been thinking." She waited, having learned that Thomas sometimes needed time to find his words. "It's been near 6 months since you came here," he continued, "and I know we're married proper, sharing the house and all. But I've been wondering if you're happy, truly happy. Because if you're not, if this life is too hard or too lonely." Evelyn moved closer, placing her hand over his. "Thomas Barrett, are you trying to give me an escape? After everything, I just need to know you're here because you want to be, not because you have nowhere else to go." She considered her words carefully. Understanding this was important. "When I first came here, yes, it was because I had no choice. But Thomas, don't you know? Haven't you seen? Every morning when I wake up and you're already working, but you've left coffee warming for me. Every evening when you help me with the heavy water buckets, even though I'm capable of managing. The way you read stumbling through the almanac just because you know I love the sound of your voice. The way you look at the curtains I made like they're precious treasures. I'm not here because I have to be anymore. I'm here because there's nowhere else I'd rather be." Thomas turned his hand to intertwine their fingers. "I love you, Evelyn. I should have said it sooner, but the words, they don't come easy." "I love you too," she whispered, and then he was kissing her. There in the spring sunshine, with the creek singing beside them and the mountains standing witness. The ride back was different, charged with new awareness. They raced the last mile, laughing like children as their horses kicked up dust. When they reached the ranch, Thomas dismounted first and reached up to help Evelyn down. But instead of setting her on her feet, he held her suspended, her hands on his shoulders, their faces close. "What are you thinking?" she asked breathlessly. "That I'm a fool for making us both wait so long?" He lowered her slowly, her body sliding against his until her feet touched ground. "That I want to be your husband in truth, not just in name." Heat flooded Evelyn's cheeks, but she didn't look away. "Then stop talking about it, Mr. Barrett." He swept her up in his arms, carrying her toward the house while she laughed and protested half-heartedly about propriety. The afternoon sun slanted through the yellow curtains as he set her down inside, both of them suddenly shy despite their bold words moments before. "Evelyn," Thomas said, framing her face with his work-roughened hands. "Are you certain? Because once we're truly together, I won't be able to let you go, not ever." She answered by rising on her toes to kiss him, pouring all her certainty into the touch. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she felt the last walls between them crumble when they finally drew apart, both breathing unsteadily. She took his hand and led him to what had once been her solitary room but would now be theirs to share. The sun was setting when they emerged, disheveled and glowing with new intimacy. Thomas couldn't seem to stop touching her, a hand on her waist as she prepared supper, fingers trailing through her loosened hair, small kisses pressed to her temple when he thought she wasn't paying attention. "I should do the evening chores," he said reluctantly as darkness gathered. "I'll come with you," Evelyn said, not wanting to be separated even for the time it took to tend the animals. They worked together in the barn, Thomas milking the cow while Evelyn fed the chickens and gathered eggs. It was the same routine they'd followed for months, but everything felt different now, richer, fuller, complete. Later, as they lay entwined in the bed they now shared, moonlight streaming through those yellow curtains, Thomas traced lazy patterns on Evelyn's bare shoulder. "What are you thinking?" she asked, echoing her earlier question. "That I'm the luckiest man in Colorado Territory, maybe in all the Western Territories combined." She smiled against his chest. "Only maybe? Well, I'd have to survey all the other married men to be certain, and that would take me away from you. So I'll settle for maybe." They laughed quietly, still marveling at this new closeness. Outside, coyotes howled in the distance and wind whispered through the grass. But inside their small house, they had created their own world. "Thomas," Evelyn said after a while. "You said earlier that you won't be able to let me go. Did you mean it?" His arms tightened around her. "Every word. You're mine now. Evelyn Barrett. And I'm yours. For better or worse. Through whatever comes." "Whatever comes," she repeated, sealing the promise with a kiss. In the weeks that followed, their love settled into something deep and steady. They still had their routines, the daily work of keeping the ranch running, but now every task was shared. Every quiet moment an opportunity for a touch or a smile. Thomas taught Evelyn to ride with increasing confidence, to read the weather and cloud formations, to tell when a cow was ready to calve. She taught him patience with letters, made the house increasingly comfortable, and slowly drew out more stories of his past. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching thunderclouds build over the mountains, Thomas surprised her by pulling out a small wrapped package. "What's this?" Evelyn asked. "Open it and see." Inside was a delicate cameo brooch, clearly old and well made. "Thomas, it's beautiful, but how—" "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "I've been keeping it in the barn. Couldn't bear to look at it after everything, but it should be worn, not hidden away. Will you wear it for me?" Evelyn's eyes filled with tears as she pinned the brooch to her collar. "I'll treasure it always." "No," Thomas said, pulling her close. I'm the one who found treasure. That day you stepped off the train, scared but trying to hide it, determined to make a go of things with a stranger. That's the day my life truly began. As the first drops of rain began to fall, they retreated inside their house, their home, leaving the vast prairie to the storm. But no amount of wind or rain could touch what they had built together. Two lonely souls who had found in each other not just companionship, but a love worth crossing a continent to discover. Summer had settled over the ranch like a warm blanket, turning the grass golden and filling the air with the scent of sage. Evelyn had grown brown from the sun, her hands now fully capable of any task the ranch demanded. The morning she and Thomas made their monthly trip to Pine Ridge for supplies dawned clear and bright. "Got the list?" Thomas asked, helping her into the wagon. Evelyn patted her pocket. Flour, sugar, coffee, salt pork, and lamp oil. Oh, and thread, if Mrs. Henderson has any blue. The ride to town had become one of her favorite times, just the two of them on the wagon seat. Thomas pointing out changes in the landscape, sharing stories of his early days homesteading with Jacob. Their shoulders touched with each bump in the road, a casual intimacy that still made her heart flutter. Pine Ridge appeared busier than usual as they approached. Several wagons clustered outside the general store, and groups of women stood talking on the boardwalk. As Thomas helped Evelyn down, she noticed how conversations suddenly stopped, how eyes followed their movement. Mrs. Barrett, Mrs. Henderson greeted them inside the store, her tone cooler than usual. "Mr. Barrett." "Ma'am?" Thomas replied, touching his hat. "We've come for supplies." As Evelyn moved through the store, gathering items from her list, she became aware of whispers following her. Two women near the fabric section made no effort to lower their voices. "Barely more than a child herself," one said. 18 when she arrived, fresh off the train. "Mail order bride," the other added with clear distaste. "Probably came from some house of ill repute back east. Why else would a girl that young marry a stranger? Just looking for an easy life, I'd wager, saw a lonely man with property and grabbed her chance." Evelyn's hands trembled as she reached for a sack of flour. The word stung more than she'd expected, perhaps because she'd been so happy lately. She'd forgotten how harsh judgment could be. "That's enough." Thomas's voice cut through the whispers like a blade. He stood behind the gossiping women, his face dark with anger. "My wife came here with nothing but courage and willingness to work. She's made a home out of a bachelor's shack, works sunrise to sunset without complaint, and has shown more kindness and grace than some who've lived here 20 years. The women flushed and hurried away, but the damage was done. Evelyn kept her head high as they completed their purchases, but Thomas could see the hurt in her eyes. The ride home was quiet, the earlier joy of the day diminished. That night, Evelyn stood at the window, staring out at the darkening sky. Thomas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Don't let them poison what we have," he said softly. "They think I'm a fortune hunter," she whispered. "That I married you for the land, for security." Thomas turned her to face him. "Let them think what they want. I know the truth. You gave up safety and familiarity for uncertainty with a stranger. That takes courage most of them will never have." She leaned into his strength, but the words echoed in her mind. That night, she lay awake long after Thomas's breathing deepened into sleep. Was that all she was to the people of Pine Ridge? An opportunist who had trapped a lonely man. The next morning, Evelyn threw herself into work with renewed vigor. If they thought she was lazy, seeking an easy life, she would prove them wrong. She expanded the garden, preserved vegetables for winter, mended everything that showed wear. When Thomas protested she was working too hard, she brushed off his concerns. A week later, she woke feeling dizzy and nauseated. The smell of coffee, usually so welcome, sent her rushing outside to be sick behind the chicken coop. When Thomas found her there, pale and shaking, his face creased with worry. "I'm fetching the doctor," he said. "No, it's just something I ate. Evelyn Barrett, you've been pushing yourself too hard, and now you're ill. I'm going..." But as she sat on the porch, waiting for his return, a different possibility occurred to her. She counted backwards, considering dates and signs she'd been too busy to notice. By the time Thomas returned with Dr. Sawyer, her heart was pounding with a mixture of joy and fear. The doctor, a kindly older man, examined her briefly before smiling. "Nothing wrong here, that time won't cure. I'd say you'll have a new addition to the family come late winter." Thomas went very still. "A baby?" "Indeed. Congratulations. Mr. Barrett." After the doctor left, silence stretched between them. Evelyn watched Thomas's face, trying to read his thoughts. He stood at the window, one hand braced against the frame, his back to her. "Thomas," she ventured, "please say something." When he turned, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. Then his expression shifted, became shuttered. "Excuse me, I need to check the animals." He was gone before she could respond, leaving Evelyn alone with her swirling emotions. Joy at the life growing within her warred with hurt at Thomas's reaction. She'd thought he would be happy, but instead he'd walked away. Hours passed. Evelyn prepared supper, her hands moving automatically through familiar tasks while her mind churned. When darkness fell and Thomas still hadn't returned, worry overtook hurt. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and went looking for him. She found him in the barn, sitting on a bale of hay with his head in his hands. In the lamplight, he looked younger, vulnerable. "Thomas?" He looked up, and she saw anguish in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said roughly. "I shouldn't have left like that." "Then why did you?" She kept her voice gentle, sensing his pain. "Because I'm terrified." The admission seemed to surprise him. "My mother died birthing my younger sister. The baby died too. I was 8, but I remember the screaming, the blood, my father crying, and we were close to town. Had a real doctor. Out here if something goes wrong." Evelyn went to him, taking his face in her hands. "I'm strong. Thomas, you know I am. Strong doesn't always matter when it comes to childbirth." His voice broke. "I can't lose you, Evelyn. Not when I just found you. Not when you've made life worth living again." She kissed him softly, tasting salt from his tears. "You won't lose me, I promise. We'll be careful, plan everything. When my time comes, we'll go to town early, stay at the boarding house near the doctor. Nothing will be left to chance." His arms came around her, pulling her close. "A baby," he said again. And this time she heard the wonder returning. "Our baby. Are you happy about it?" she asked, needing to hear the words. Happy and terrified in equal measure, he admitted. "But yes, Evelyn, a child made from our love. How could I be anything but happy?" They stayed in the barn for a while, holding each other, sharing their fears and hopes. When they finally returned to the house, something had shifted. The news that had initially divided them now bound them closer. In the days that followed, Thomas became almost comically protective. He tried to stop her from lifting anything heavier than a tea kettle, insisted she rest in the afternoons, and watched her with worried eyes whenever she felt nauseated. "I'm not made of glass," Evelyn protested one morning when he tried to take over gathering eggs. "No, but you're carrying precious cargo," he countered, his hand moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. The gesture melted her irritation. These moments, when Thomas's wonder at impending fatherhood shone through his worry, were worth any amount of fussing. As word spread of her condition, some of the hostility in town eased. Mrs. Henderson even offered advice on dealing with morning sickness, though her manner remained stiff. But there were still those who whispered, who suggested she'd trap Thomas with a baby, securing her position. One particularly difficult day, after enduring pointed stares and whispers during a brief trip to town, Evelyn found herself crying in the wagon. Thomas stopped the horses immediately. "What is it? Are you in pain? The baby?" "No," she sobbed. "It's just, they'll never accept me, will they? I'll always be the young mail-order bride who took advantage of a lonely man." Thomas helped her down from the wagon and led her to a shady spot beneath a cottonwood. He sat on the grass and pulled her into his lap, holding her while she cried out her frustration and hurt. "Listen to me," he said when her tears slowed. "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to believe it. You saved me, Evelyn. Before you came, I was just existing, going through the motions. I'd given up on happiness, on having a real life. Then you stepped off that train, young, yes, but brave and determined, and everything changed. But they don't matter," he said firmly. "What matters is us, this life we're building, this child we've created. Let the gossips talk. In time, they'll find someone else to discuss. And if they don't," he shrugged, "then we'll build our own world here, just us and our children." "Children?" Evelyn smiled through her tears. "Already planning more. A whole house full, if you're willing," he said, kissing her forehead. "Boys to help with the ranch, girls as beautiful as their mother. We'll be so busy raising them. We won't have time to care what anyone thinks." That night, as they lay in bed with Thomas's hand protective over her growing child, Evelyn made a decision. She wouldn't let others' opinions poison her happiness. She had Thomas's love, a child on the way, and a home she'd helped create. The women in town could whisper all they wanted. She knew the truth of what she and Thomas had built together. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "And I love you," Thomas replied, pulling her closer. "Both of you, always." Outside, coyotes called to the rising moon, and wind rustled through the grass. But inside their small house, love grew as surely as the child within her, strong enough to weather any storm that might come. Autumn painted the landscape in shades of gold and rust, and Evelyn's belly had grown round beneath her loosened dresses. She moved more slowly now, one hand often resting on the active child within. The baby seemed particularly restless today as she prepared the noon meal, sending ripples across her stretched skin. "Active little one," she murmured, rubbing soothing circles. "Just like your father, never still." Thomas had ridden to the far pasture to check on the cattle, promising to return by evening. These solo rides had become more common lately. He claimed it was necessary ranch work, but Evelyn sensed something else. A distance had crept between them since her pregnancy became visible, a careful space that hadn't existed before. At night, he still held her, but tentatively, as if she might break. When the baby moved beneath his palm, he would pull back, wonder replaced by something that looked like fear. Their intimate moments had ceased entirely. Thomas claiming he didn't want to risk harm, despite the doctor's assurances that such activities were safe. The sound of horses approaching drew her from her thoughts. Too early for Thomas, and more than one rider. Evelyn moved to the window, her heart sinking as she recognized Mrs. Dalton from town, accompanied by another woman she didn't know, Mrs. Barrett. "Mrs. Dalton called as Evelyn stepped onto the porch. "We've come to check on your condition." The words were polite, but the tone suggested inspection rather than concern. Evelyn smoothed her apron and managed a smile. "How kind. Would you care for some tea?" The women exchanged glances as they entered, their eyes taking in every detail of the small house, the handmade curtains, the worn but clean floors, the simple furnishings. Evelyn served tea with hands that wanted to tremble, acutely aware of how her home must appear to these town women with their finer things. "You're quite young to be in your condition," the unknown woman observed. "What are you now? 19? "Yes, ma'am. And already breeding." The woman's tone made it sound crude, shameful. "Though I suppose that's why you came west, to secure your position quickly." Heat flooded Evelyn's cheeks. "I came west because Thomas advertised for a wife. We married properly, before God and witnesses." "Of course." "Mrs." Dalton said with false sweetness. "Still, it must have been quite a shock for poor Mr. Barrett, becoming a father so soon after acquiring a wife. Men can find such changes difficult." "Thomas is happy about the baby," Evelyn said firmly, though doubt gnawed at her. The women exchanged knowing looks. Has he been spending more time away from the house lately? Mrs. Dalton asked. Men often do when their wives are indisposed. They seek comfort elsewhere. Thomas would never— My dear child, the unnamed woman interrupted. You're very naive. A man has needs, and when his wife can't fulfill them, well, there's a certain establishment in Millbrook, not 20 miles from here. The Golden Lily, they call it. Many ranchers are known to visit when their domestic situations become complicated. The words hit Evelyn like physical blows. She stood abruptly, her hands clenched. I'll thank you to leave my home. Now. The women rose, satisfaction gleaming in their eyes at having planted their poisonous seeds. After they left, Evelyn sank into a chair, her mind reeling. Thomas's recent distance, his frequent rides, his reluctance to touch her. Could there be truth in their cruel implications? When Thomas returned at dusk, Evelyn watched him care for his horse, looking for signs of deception. He moved with the same steady grace, but did he seem guilty? Was that dust on his clothes from the far pasture or from the road to Millbrook? Good day, he asked as he entered, kissing her forehead briefly before moving to wash. Mrs. Dalton visited, she said carefully, with a friend. Thomas's jaw tightened. What did those harpies want? To see how I was faring. She paused, gathering courage. Thomas, have you been going to the far pasture all these times? Truly. He turned, frowning. Of course. Where else would I go? The question hung between them. Evelyn wanted to ask about Millbrook, about the Golden Lily, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she turned away. Nowhere. I just wondered. That night, Thomas reached for her in bed, but she stiffened. His hand fell away immediately. Have I done something wrong? He asked in the darkness. Yes, she wanted to say. You've grown distant when I need you most. You've given those horrible women ammunition for their gossip. But she only said, I'm tired. Days passed in mounting tension. Thomas grew more withdrawn, confused by Evelyn's coldness. Evelyn tortured herself with doubts, reading guilt in his every action. The easy intimacy they'd built shattered like winter ice. The breaking point came a week later. Thomas announced he needed to ride to town for supplies alone. I'll come with you, Evelyn said immediately. The wagon ride is too rough in your condition. Then I'll ride Buttercup. Evelyn, be reasonable. You're 7 months along, and perfectly capable of making a trip to town. The words exploded from her. Unless you have reasons for not wanting me there? Plans to make a side trip to Millbrook, perhaps? Thomas went very still. What are you talking about? The Golden Lily, she spat. I know all about it. Where men go when their wives can't, when they're too swollen with child to be appealing. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by hurt. You think I've been— Evelyn, how could you believe that? You've been distant, gone for hours, coming back with excuses. You won't touch me. Because I'm terrified, Thomas roared, making her step back. Every time I see you with that belly, I remember my mother screaming, dying. Every time I feel the baby move, I think about losing you both. I've been riding myself to exhaustion trying to outrun the fear, not visiting any establishment. Then why didn't you tell me? Tears streamed down her face. Why pull away? Because you don't need my fears on top of everything else. His voice broke. You're 19 years old, about to have a baby in the middle of nowhere, with only me for protection. You should be worried enough without me adding to it. They stood facing each other, the truth finally bare between them. Then Evelyn moved, closing the distance to wrap her arms around him as best she could with her belly in the way. Thomas Barrett, you're a fool, she said against his chest. Don't you know by now? Your fears are my fears, your joys are my joys. That's what marriage means. His arms came around her carefully. Those women are vipers who delight in causing pain. I should have known better than to listen. She pulled back to look at him. But you have to stop running from me. When you're afraid, tell me. When you need to ride until you're exhausted. Take me with you, at least as far as I can go. Don't leave me alone with my imagination. That night, rain began to fall, the kind of cold, steady rain that marked autumn's end. Evelyn woke from restless sleep to find the bed empty. Panic flared until she saw Thomas sitting by the window, watching the water run down the glass. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. "Bad dreams?" He didn't turn. "You, calling for me, and I couldn't reach you." Evelyn rose carefully and went to him, taking his hand. "I'm right here. Feel." She placed his palm on her belly where the baby rolled and kicked. "We're both here, both strong. I love you so much it terrifies me," he admitted. "Before you, losing everything seemed bearable because I had nothing. Now you have everything to fight for." She finished. "Thomas, I can't promise nothing will go wrong, but I can promise that shutting me out won't prevent it. If something happens, which it won't, would you rather have spent these months distant and afraid, or close and loving?" He pulled her onto his lap, holding her as close as her belly allowed. "When did you become so wise?" "When I fell in love with a stubborn rancher who thinks he has to carry every burden alone." They stayed there until dawn, watching the rain wash the world clean. When the sun finally broke through the clouds, it felt like a benediction. Thomas helped Evelyn back to bed, then lay beside her, his hand protective over their child. "No more running," he promised. "No more distance, and no more listening to gossiping women," Evelyn added. "Deal." He kissed her softly, then with growing passion as she responded eagerly. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, he grinned. "The doctor did say normal activities were safe." Evelyn laughed, the sound bright as the morning sun. "Then perhaps you should stop treating me like spun glass, Mr. Barrett." Later, as they lay entwined, the baby's movement strong between them, Evelyn knew they had weathered another storm. There would be more challenges ahead, the birth itself, the gossips in town, the hardships of raising a child on the frontier. But they would face them together, no longer divided by fear or doubt. "Thomas," she said sleepily. "Next time you need to ride to escape your fears, I'm coming with you. We'll find a gentle path. Go slow, but no more leaving me behind." His arms tightened around her. "No more leaving you behind," he agreed. "Ever." Outside, the world sparkled with rain-washed clarity. Inside, two hearts beat as one, or rather three, counting the little one who kicked as if in agreement. The golden lily and its poisonous implications faded like the morning mist, leaving only truth, a man and woman who loved each other, preparing to welcome the child their love had created, stronger for having faced their fears together. Winter descended upon the ranch with a vengeance, bringing snow that piled against the windows and temperatures that made the walls crack in the night. Evelyn, now heavily pregnant, moved about the house with difficulty, her back aching constantly. Thomas had become her shadow, rarely leaving her side except for essential chores. "I can still make bread," she protested one morning as he tried to take over kneading the dough. "Dr. Sawyer said you need rest," Thomas countered, his hands already working the mixture. "Besides, I watched you enough times. Can't be that hard." Evelyn smiled despite her discomfort, watching him attack the dough with more force than finesse. These past weeks had brought them closer than ever. Thomas's earlier fears replaced by tender determination to care for her. That afternoon, as snow began falling again, Evelyn felt the first sharp pain. She gasped, hand flying to her belly, and Thomas was beside her instantly. "What is it? Is it time?" "I don't know," she breathed, waiting for the pain to pass. "Maybe." An hour later, with pains coming regularly, Thomas was pacing like a caged animal. "We should have gone to town last week. I knew we should have." The snow was too deep, Evelyn reminded him from her position on the bed. "We'd have been trapped there for months. Better trapped near the doctor than—" He stopped as another contraction seized her. By evening, Evelyn knew they were in trouble. The pains were intense, but progress was slow, and the baby seemed positioned wrong. Thomas had helped deliver calves and foals, but this was different. This was his wife, his child. his whole world struggling on their bed. "I need to get help," he said, already reaching for his coat. "You can't." Evelyn grabbed his hand. "The snow's too deep. The nearest neighbor is 20 miles. "Then what do I do?" His voice cracked with desperation. Before she could answer, they heard something impossible, the sound of horses approaching through the storm. Thomas yanked open the door to find an unexpected sight. Joseph standing there. The native man Thomas had helped years ago when others would have let him die, stood there with an elderly woman. "Saw your smoke," Joseph said simply. "My grandmother, Mary Two Rivers. She's delivered many babies." The old woman pushed past Thomas without ceremony, her practiced eyes taking in the scene. She spoke rapidly to Joseph in their language, then began issuing orders that Thomas scrambled to follow. Clean cloths, hot water, specific herbs from her bag. Through the long night, Mary Two Rivers worked with calm efficiency, her gnarled hands gentle but sure. She showed Thomas how to support Evelyn during contractions, taught him words in her language to whisper for strength. When Evelyn cried out in pain, the old woman didn't offer false comfort but steady encouragement. "Baby is turned," Mary explained through Joseph. "Must convince to come right way." Evelyn barely heard, lost in a haze of pain and exhaustion. She was aware of Thomas beside her, his voice hoarse from hours of encouragement, his hand numb from her crushing grip. The storm howled outside, but inside, another battle was being fought. "Can't," Evelyn gasped after a particularly brutal contraction. "Too tired?" "Yes, you can," Thomas said fiercely. "You're the strongest woman I know. You crossed a continent to marry a stranger. You made a home from nothing. You won't give up now." Mary Two Rivers nodded approvingly, then spoke to Joseph, who translated. "She says the baby comes now. One more fight." The final push seemed to last forever. Evelyn screamed. Thomas wept. And then, miraculously, a thin cry pierced the air. Mary Two Rivers lifted a squirming, red-faced infant, speaking soft words in her language as she cleaned the baby. "Daughter," Joseph translated, smiling. "Healthy girl." Thomas stared at the tiny creature as Mary placed her on Evelyn's chest. The baby was perfect, dark hair plastered to her small head, miniature fists waving in protest at the cold world. Evelyn sobbed with relief and joy, her trembling hands cradling their daughter. "She's beautiful," Thomas whispered, tears streaming down his face, just like her mother. The crisis wasn't over. There was still the afterbirth, the bleeding to control, the exhaustion that threatened to pull Evelyn under. But Mary Two Rivers remained steady, her ancient wisdom guiding them through each stage. By dawn, mother and baby were stable, sleeping peacefully while Thomas kept vigil. Joseph and his grandmother stayed another day, until the storm passed. Mary taught Evelyn about nursing, about reading the baby's different cries, about herbs that would help her heal. Before leaving, she placed a small beaded amulet on the baby's cradle. "For protection," Joseph explained. "My grandmother says your daughter is born between two worlds, the old and the new. She will need strength from both." Thomas tried to pay them, but Joseph refused. "You helped me when I had nothing. This is balance restored." After they left, Thomas and Evelyn were alone with their daughter for the first time. The baby, still unnamed, slept peacefully while her parents marveled at her existence. "I thought I'd lost you both," Thomas admitted, his voice raw. "When you were in such pain, when the baby wouldn't come." "But you didn't," Evelyn interrupted. "We're here, Thomas. We survived, thanks to Joseph and his grandmother. If they hadn't come, but they did come, because you showed kindness when others wouldn't." She shifted the baby to her other arm, wincing at the movement. "What should we name her?" Thomas considered. "What about Hope, born in a storm but bringing light?" "Hope Mary Barrett," Evelyn said, testing the sound. "For Mary Two Rivers." "Hope Mary Barrett," Thomas agreed. Touching his daughter's tiny hand, the baby grabbed his finger with surprising strength, and his face transformed with wonder. "She's so small, but so fierce." The next weeks passed in a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and sleepless nights. Thomas threw himself into fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to ranching, learning to soothe Hope when she cried, changing her with increasingly confident hands, singing off-key lullabies that somehow worked. When Hope was 3 weeks old, Thomas finally made it to town for supplies. He returned with more than flour and coffee. He brought news that spread quickly through Pine Ridge, how Thomas Barrett's young wife had delivered their baby in a blizzard, aided by the Indian woman whose family Thomas had helped, how mother and child had survived against the odds. The story seemed to shift something in the town's perception. When Evelyn finally brought Hope to town at 6 weeks old, women who had previously whispered behind their hands now approached with genuine interest. "Such a beautiful baby," Mrs. Henderson said, peering at Hope bundled in Evelyn's arms. "Born in a storm. I heard, you must be made of strong stuff." Mrs. Barrett, even Mrs. Dalton, queen of the gossips, offered grudging respect. "Not many women could have managed what you did, especially so young." Evelyn accepted their words graciously, but her real joy came from Thomas's proud smile as he watched her navigate these social waters. They were a family now, no longer just a mail-order bride and a lonely rancher, but parents united in love for their daughter. That night, as Hope slept in the cradle Thomas had built, Evelyn found him standing over it, watching their daughter breathe. "What are you thinking?" she asked, slipping her arm around his waist. "That I'm the luckiest man alive," he said softly. "That morning I wrote that advertisement. I just wanted someone to make the silence bearable. I never imagined this, you, Hope, a real family." "You promised me love," Evelyn reminded him. "Not just shelter and a ring. Did I keep my promise?" She rose on her toes to kiss him. "Beyond my wildest dreams." Hope stirred in her sleep, making small sounds that had both parents instantly alert, but she settled again, one tiny fist pressed to her mouth. In the soft light of the oil lamp, she looked like a miracle, which, Evelyn supposed, she was, a miracle born of loneliness transformed to love, of courage in the face of fear, of kindness repaid in the darkest hour. "She'll be strong," Thomas said, "growing up out here, with you as her mother." "And you as her father," Evelyn added. "Teaching her to ride before she can properly walk, no doubt." "Of course," Thomas grinned. "Can't have a Barrett who doesn't know horses." They stood together, watching their daughter sleep, while outside the winter wind howled across the empty plains. But inside their small house, warmth and love created an unbreakable circle. They had survived the storm, literal and figurative, and emerged stronger. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced everything else, together, united, and filled with hope as endless as the Colorado sky. Spring came late that year, but when it arrived, it transformed the world. Hope was 4 months old now, a happy baby who seemed to smile at everything, the dancing curtains, her father's silly faces, and especially the wildflowers her mother tucked around her cradle. The ranch had found its rhythm again, with Evelyn managing both house and baby, while Thomas worked the land with renewed energy. It was a warm May afternoon when disaster struck. Evelyn had just put Hope down for her nap when she smelled smoke, not the familiar scent from the stove, but something acrid and wrong. She rushed to the window to see black smoke billowing from the barn, flames already licking through the roof. "Thomas!" she screamed, knowing he was inside tending to a sick calf. Without thinking, she ran toward the burning structure. The heat hit her like a physical wall, but through the smoke she could see Thomas trying to free the panicked horses. A beam had fallen across the stall door, trapping them. "Get back to the house," Thomas shouted when he saw her. "Not without you." She grabbed a bucket, knowing it was futile against such flames but needing to do something. Together they fought to move the beam, the smoke growing thicker, the heat unbearable. Finally, with strength born of desperation, they shifted it enough for the horses to bolt free, but as they turned to escape, another section of the roof collapsed. Thomas threw himself over Evelyn, pushing her toward the door as burning timber crashed down where she'd been standing. They stumbled out, coughing and gasping, Thomas's shirt smoldering from flying embers. Evelyn beat at the sparks with her bare hands, not feeling the burns until later. They could only watch helplessly as their barn, with all their winter feed, tools, and equipment, was consumed. "Hope," Evelyn gasped, suddenly remembering. "Go," Thomas said, pushing her toward the house. "I'll try to save what I can." But there was nothing to save. By the time neighbors saw the smoke and arrived to help, only blackened ruins remained. Thomas stood staring at the devastation, his face grim. Without the barn, without feed for the animals, they faced ruin. That night, as Evelyn tended to Thomas's burns and her own, they took stock of their situation. The house had been spared, and most of the animals had survived, but they had lost so much hay for the cattle, grain for the horses, tools accumulated over years. "We'll have to sell the cattle," Thomas said dully. "Maybe some of the land. Even then, no." Evelyn's voice was firm. "We're not selling anything. Evelyn, be practical. Without feed, then we'll find another way." She settled Hope at her breast, drawing strength from her daughter's peaceful nursing. "We've come too far to give up now." But practical solutions seemed impossible. Their meager savings wouldn't cover rebuilding, and banks didn't lend to struggling ranchers. For the first time since their marriage, Evelyn saw defeat in Thomas's eyes. 3 days after the fire, unexpected help arrived. Joseph Standing Bear appeared with several men from his tribe, all carrying tools. Behind them came wagons loaded with lumber. For the barn, Joseph said simply, "My people remember who helped us through the hard winter 2 years ago. Now we help you." Thomas's voice was thick with emotion. "I can't pay." "No payment, only promise. When others need help, you give it." For 2 weeks, the men worked alongside Thomas, raising a new barn from the ashes of the old. Other neighbors, shamed perhaps by the Native Americans' generosity, began arriving with contributions, a wagon load of hay from one, tools from another, sacks of grain from a third. Even some from town came, including Mrs. Henderson with a basket of preserves and fresh bread. Evelyn worked tirelessly, cooking for the workers, tending injuries, all while caring for Hope. She moved with new authority. No longer the uncertain girl who had stepped off the train, but a woman who had faced birth, death, and near disaster without breaking. The real test came when she had to take charge completely. Thomas, exhausted from days of hard labor and little sleep, had been kicked by a spooked horse. His leg wasn't broken, but badly bruised, leaving him unable to walk for several days. With the barn half-built and workers needing direction, everyone looked to Evelyn. "The support beam needs to go here," she said, pointing with confidence she didn't entirely feel. She had watched Thomas enough to know the basics, and Joseph quietly assisted when she faltered. She assigned tasks, solved problems, made decisions that would have terrified her a year ago. "Look at her," she overheard one of the workers say. "That little girl we all gossiped about, running this operation like she was born to it." Maybe she was. Another replied, "Takes a special kind of woman to thrive out here." We might have misjudged her. When the barn was complete, larger and stronger than the original, the whole community gathered for a celebration. Tables were set up in the yard, laden with food everyone had contributed. Musicians appeared with fiddles and harmonicas, and soon couples were dancing on the packed earth. Evelyn stood holding Hope, watching Thomas talking with their neighbors, really talking, not just conducting business. The isolation they had both wrapped themselves in had been broken by tragedy and rebuilt into something better. "Mrs. Barrett," she turned to find Mrs. Dalton, the worst of the gossips, standing uncertainly nearby. "I owe you an apology. What you've done here, how you've handled everything. I was wrong about you." We all were. Evelyn could have been cold, could have reminded the woman of her cruel words about mail-order brides and fortune hunters. Instead, she smiled. "We all make mistakes. Mrs. Dalton, what matters is learning from them." The older woman's face softened with relief. "Your daughter is beautiful. Might I hold her as Mrs.?" Dalton cooed over Hope. Other women gathered around, genuinely warm now in their admiration. They asked about the birth, about managing the ranch, about her plans for the future. Evelyn found herself at the center of a community she had thought would never accept her. Later, as the sun set and the musicians played slower tunes, Thomas found her sitting on the porch steps. His limp was barely noticeable now, and his eyes were bright with something that looked like peace. "Dance with me," he said, holding out his hand. "Here? Now?" "Right here, right now." She passed Hope to Mrs. Henderson and let Thomas pull her into his arms. They swayed together on their own land, surrounded by neighbors who had become friends, while their new barn stood strong against the darkening sky. "You were magnificent," Thomas murmured against her hair. "Taking charge like that, showing everyone what I already knew, that you're the strongest woman in Colorado Territory." "I was terrified every moment," she admitted. "But you didn't let it stop you. That's what courage is." "Evelyn," he pulled back to look at her. "That scared girl who got off the train, would she have believed she could do what you've done?" "No," Evelyn said softly. "But that girl didn't have you, didn't have hope, didn't have a home worth fighting for." As if summoned by her name, Hope began to fuss. Evelyn retrieved her daughter and rejoined Thomas, the three of them watching their neighbors celebrate on their land. The fire had taken so much, but from its ashes had risen something more valuable than any barn acceptance, community, and proof that they could survive anything together. "What are you thinking?" Thomas asked, his arm around both wife and daughter. Evelyn looked at their new barn, at their neighbors laughing together, at the vast sky stretching endlessly above. She thought of the frightened girl she'd been, scrubbing floors in Philadelphia, reading a stranger's advertisement with desperate hope. That girl could never have imagined this moment, standing strong beside a husband who loved her, holding a daughter born of that love, surrounded by a community that had finally embraced her. "I'm thinking," she said, leaning into Thomas's warmth, "that sometimes the worst disasters bring the greatest blessings." Hope gurgled as if in agreement, and Thomas laughed, that rich, rare sound that Evelyn loved. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they were together, unbroken and unafraid. The mail-order bride had become a frontier wife, tested by fire and proven true. And this was only the beginning of their story. 1 year had passed since the fire that nearly broke them but instead forged them stronger. The ranch had prospered beyond their modest dreams. The new barn stood filled with hay. The cattle had multiplied, and a second small cabin had been built to house the hired hand they could now afford. Hope toddled everywhere on sturdy legs, her dark hair catching the sun as she chased chickens with delighted squeals. Evelyn stood in her expanded garden, Hope playing at her feet while she harvested vegetables for preserving. At 20, she bore little resemblance to the frightened girl who had arrived on the train 2.5 years ago. The sun had bronzed her skin, work had strengthened her body, and motherhood had given her a confidence that ran bone deep. "Mrs. Barrett," a voice called from the road. She looked up to see young Sally Morrison, the schoolteacher's daughter, approaching on horseback. "Ma'am, my mother sent me to ask, would you speak at the Harvest Festival about your journey west and, well, everything?" Evelyn's hands stilled on the tomato vines. "Speak? In front of everyone?" "Please, ma'am. There are other young women thinking of coming west, and Mother says your story could help them understand what it's really like, the good and the bad." That evening, as she discussed the request with Thomas over dinner, he smiled at her nervousness. "You've faced down blizzards, birthed a baby in a storm, and ran a barn raising. You're worried about talking?" "That's different," Evelyn protested. "Those things had to be done. This is choosing to stand up in front of everyone and show them who you really are." Thomas finished. "The woman I fell in love with. The woman who changed my life." The Harvest Festival arrived crisp and golden, the town decorated with cornstalks and pumpkins. A small platform had been erected near the church, and it seemed the entire territory had gathered. Evelyn's hands trembled as she approached the platform, Hope on her hip and Thomas steady beside her. "Go on," he murmured, taking Hope. "Show them." Evelyn climbed the steps, looking out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some strange. She saw Mrs. Dalton in the front row, Mrs. Henderson nodding encouragingly, and surprisingly, Joseph standing bare and his family near the back. Taking a deep breath, she began. 2.5 years ago, I stepped off a train with nothing but a carpet bag and the promise of marriage to a stranger. I was 18, orphaned, and desperate enough to travel across a continent for the hope of a home. The crowd was silent, attentive. She continued, her voice growing stronger. I won't lie and say it was easy. The isolation nearly broke me at first. The work was harder than anything I'd known. There were times I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. And there were those among you who made it clear I wasn't welcome. Just another mail-order bride trying to trap a lonely man. Some in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, but Evelyn pressed on. But I also found something here I'd never had before. A partner who saw me as more than free labor. Work that built something lasting instead of just maintaining someone else's comfort. And when our daughter came during that terrible blizzard, I discovered strength I didn't know existed, both in myself and in this community. She spoke of Mary Two Rivers and her life-saving knowledge, of neighbors who had judged her but came through when disaster struck, of learning that courage wasn't the absence of fear but acting despite it. I came west looking for survival, she concluded. What I found was a life, a real life, with real love, real challenges, and real triumphs. To those considering making this journey, I say this: come with your eyes open. Be prepared for hardship unlike anything you've known, but also be prepared for the possibility of becoming more than you ever imagined. The applause started slowly, then swelled. She saw tears on several faces, nods of recognition from other women who had made similar journeys. As she stepped down, women crowded around her, young women with questions, older women with their own stories to share. That night, there was a dance in the town hall. For the first time, Evelyn found herself at the center rather than the edges, sought out for conversation, included in the fellowship. As she danced with Thomas, Hope sleeping peacefully in her cradle nearby, she marveled at the transformation, not just in herself, but in how others saw her. I have something for you, Thomas said as they took a break from dancing. He led her outside where the stars blazed overhead, then pulled out a key. Remember when I promised you a room of your own to read and write? Thomas, we have more important things to. Nothing's more important than keeping promises to my wife. He guided her to the side of their house where a new addition had been built. She'd thought it was just storage, but when he opened the door and lit a lamp, she gasped. It was small but perfect. Shelves for books, a desk by the window, a comfortable chair. On the desk lay paper, ink, and new pens. For your letters. Thomas said, Sally Morrison wasn't the only one who thought your story should be shared. There are newspapers back east that publish accounts of frontier life. And more importantly, there are young women like you who are scared and uncertain, who need to hear the truth from someone who lived it. Evelyn traced her fingers over the smooth desk surface, tears blurring her vision. It's perfect. You're perfect. Far from it, he said, pulling her close. But I'm yours, and that's enough. In the months that followed, Evelyn began writing first letters to newspapers, then longer pieces about frontier life. She wrote honestly about the challenges, but also the rewards, about the strength required, but also the strength gained. Her words traveled back east, published in papers from Philadelphia to Boston, signed simply E. Barrett, Colorado Territory. She received letters in response, from young women considering the journey, from mothers worried about daughters who had already left, from other frontier wives sharing their own stories. Her little writing room became a bridge between worlds, connecting the frightened girls contemplating the unknown with the women who had already made the leap. Hope grew strong and wild, as comfortable on horseback as on foot, chattering in a mix of English and the native words Mary Two Rivers taught her during visits. The ranch prospered, allowing them to help others as they had been helped, hiring young men fresh from the East, offering shelter to families traveling through, always remembering their promise to Joseph about passing kindness forward. On a spring day 3 years after the fire, Evelyn stood again before the town, this time to dedicate a small library funded by the sale of her published writings. As she cut the ribbon, Hope, at 4 years old, solemnly handed out books to the children present, while Thomas beamed with pride. "This library," Evelyn said, "is for every person who believes knowledge and stories can change lives, because a single advertisement in a newspaper changed mine, leading me to love, to family, and to a purpose I never imagined." After the ceremony, as families explored the new library, Thomas found Evelyn sitting at her old desk in her writing room, penning another letter to a frightened young woman in Baltimore. "What are you telling her?" he asked, reading over her shoulder. "The truth," Evelyn replied. "That the West will test everything you think you know about yourself. That loneliness can be harder than any physical labor. That some days you'll question every choice that brought you here." She paused, dipping her pen. "But also that love can grow in the most unlikely places. That strength you never knew you had will emerge when needed. And that sometimes becoming a mail-order bride isn't about finding a husband. It's about finding yourself." Thomas kissed the top of her head. "Think she'll come?" "I hope so," Evelyn said, sealing the letter. "Everyone deserves the chance to discover what they're truly capable of." As the sun set over their ranch, painting the mountains gold, Evelyn thought of that frightened 18-year-old girl reading an advertisement in a dim Philadelphia kitchen. That girl had wanted only escape, survival, the bare minimum of kindness. She had found instead adventure, purpose, and a love that transformed two lonely people into a family. The mail-order bride from Philadelphia had become a voice for the frontier, a mother raising a daughter to be fearless, a wife who had taught a taciturn rancher to open his heart, and a woman who had learned that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with the desperate courage to say yes to the unknown. In her latest letter to a newspaper back east, she had written, "I came to the frontier seeking a home. What I discovered was that home isn't a place, it's the life you build with someone who sees your potential even when you can't see it yourself. It's the community that judges you, breaks you, then helps rebuild you stronger. It's the child who carries your hope into the future. Home is what happens when you're brave enough to leave everything behind and foolish enough to believe in love." As stars emerged in the vast Colorado sky, Evelyn closed her writing desk and joined her family for the evening meal. Hope chattered about her adventures with the barn cats. Thomas shared news from town, and Evelyn listened with a full heart. She had traveled so far from that house in Philadelphia, not just in miles, but in spirit. The scared girl was gone, replaced by a woman who had earned her place in this wild land through grit, grace, and the kind of love that transforms everything it touches. Her story was one of thousands, women who had ventured west as mail-order brides, each carrying their own hopes and fears, but it was hers to tell, and in telling it, she lit a path for others to follow. For in the end, the greatest gift she could offer wasn't false promises of easy lives or guaranteed happiness, but the truth that within every uncertain girl lay the potential for an extraordinary woman. She just needed the courage to buy that train ticket and see where the journey led. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining us around the Wild West Campfire for this tale of love, courage, and transformation on the American frontier. We'd love to hear where you're listening from tonight. Whether it's from a bustling city or your own quiet corner of the world, please subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more authentic stories from America's pioneering days, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Did Evelyn's journey resonate with you? What part of her story touched your heart? Until next time, may you find your own frontier to conquer and your own strength to discover. Happy trails, partners.